Hi, this is Michael Jordan with AB Friendly Company, and welcome once again to the Underground Meadery. We've taken you through some basic steps of making a mead in the first week. The first week we showed you yeast, and we talked about equipment, and we made a mead. So real quick, what I'm going to show you is a couple books. Now I know, like, one of the most famous books everybody's like looking for and using is How to Make Mead Like a Viking. But there are a lot of books out there, and you should have a vast reference to use for different things. This one right here by Brian Actions and Peter Duncan is Making Mead. It's a pretty small book. It's a basic book that's made to do, just basically has different recipes in it, and I think it's a good starter book for you to get into. It doesn't go really into the deep history of anything, but it has a couple good recipes in it. In fact, I like their gooseberry marmel that's in here. So it has some good reference in it. I think once you start really getting to making meads, this one right here is a step-to-step instruction of home brewing by Brewing Meads. It's the one sold from the Miser Cup. So this one right here is pretty good. This one has a lot of Grand Champion books in it that are used quite often in Miser Cup with progressive prize-winning meads. So I think it's a very good book to look at. Then once you really get to rocking and rolling, this is Ken Shimek, man. It's a good cookbook. It has a little bit of history. It goes into the difference of beekeeping, and it gets a little more in depth into mead making. I think it's a very good book to get. Here's another small book. This one right here is very good. It's The Drinking of the Kings. So it seems to be a very good book to try to use. It's a cooking and beverage book. I actually got this one at a winery as I was going through. So it's pretty good. It's got a lot of good photos in it. And it talks about meads and the history of bees and the type of beekeeping. So once you really get into making meads and stuff, I have this book. This one's called Wild Wines and Meads. It talks about how to use grapes and extractions, and this is basically a good book to tell you about different types of fruit that you can use, and it also talks about vegetables you can use. It goes through lots of different spices and herbs. This is more of a wild crafting book. And it teaches you about wild crafting a little bit and the different types of fruits and stuff that go well into meads. And then once you really get into doing that, this is the Wild Drink and Cocktails book by Emily Hand. And it goes outside the box. And it talks about mixing different fruits together, mints, and incorporating many different products to make wines as well as meads. And I think this will help you step out of the box a little bit and compromising with what grapefruits to use, what apples work best with best spices, how to infuse chocolates and stuff with chili peppers. So this is a really good book when you get into more of what different kinds of things to put in your meads. Here's a great big book of meads, and this one is an award-winning mead maker book. It's the Comprehensive Guide of Mead Making. And it's by Steve Paez, and it's a different kind of mead making book. It talks about yeast, temperatures a little bit more, has some great photos that go through with it when you're making meads. I think it's another good book to look into. Another great book when it comes to getting into meads is, if you're on a Kindle, is The Big Book of Meads. In fact, it was just released here in January of 2017, and it's a Kindle book. And it's called The Big Book of Mead Making. And it has everything kind of like what I'm doing on gallon measurements. And it has a lot of recipes in it from all over the world. And it's based on where I found where my Polish mentor came from, Poland. And it goes through with some great ones. So that's a Kindle book. And those are some mead making books I think that you should look into that teaches you in depth about mead making, different types of fruits and how to wild craft, how to make some different cocktail mixes to go with your meads. Once you really get into mixing your meads, I think a good one right here This is the first steps in yeast culture. This is a go-to book when it comes to talking about making yeast. This is so you can propagate your own yeast formulas, how to save them, how to culture them. Man, this is a spectacular book. I've recommended it to a few people. Actually, a lot of people have been picking it up due to the fact of what it tells you exactly how to culture yeast and how to save it. I think it's a great book on yeast culture. When anybody talks about yeast, this is the sacred book of beers. So if you want to get into a little bit more of different than mead, remember beer is more advanced with the different hops, adding hops at different stages, different yeast for malt extracts. And when you're talking about different malt extracts, that's like saying different types of honey. And adding yeast at different phases is almost like saying different types of fermentation part. Primary fermentation, second fermentation. This is all about a brewing phase, and I think it's a great book on getting more of your herbal essence out of your ground, what you're wildcrafting for. So if you want to dabble a little bit in mead making, you should dabble a little bit in some different brewing aspects, making some wines, getting into some beer making. Ann Pollock has a great book on ciders, all about apple usage, right? So you can go right into apple usage and making ciders, which is, I think, another easy format of making an adult beverage. So I think this is another good go-to book to go to, and this gets you into cider making. So we've thrown out a beer book, we've thrown out a cider book, we've thrown out a bit of yeast culture out to you. The Alaskan Bootlegger's Bible gets more into distilling. Teaches how to build distills, how to do some distilling. Remember, by law, distilling is illegal. Icing to a certain percentage is legal, but anything by the BBT says that distilling is illegal, and you have to really go through a whole bunch of things if you're going to do distilling. But this talks about distilling and icing and stuff like that, and it brings the alcohol content in your mead, kills off a lot of bacteria, makes it so it doesn't vinegar. There's some really good things about distilling that I think you can think about, even when it comes to making essential oils. Oils are a form of distilling. So those are some things to think about. And then one of my favorite kind of books that's a little worn out is the White House Cookbook from 1887. This book is an elite book. It has a lot of great things about table settings, cuts of meat. It goes through a big dimension of how to pair your wines with the types of foods that you're doing, and it has a good mead recipe in it used at the White House. So I think this is a pretty interesting book to use. Remember, I only carry a few books because I'm an experimental mead maker. As we go through some of our mead making skills that we're going to be doing, you're going to see us use Tootsie Rolls. You're going to see us use Dum Dum Lollipops. We're going to go into sodas and different types of juices. So I think it's more of expanding and going outside the realm of mead making. But I think you should pick up maybe a couple of these books, use them for some reference, dig out some recipes. Remember, there is never a bad mead if it's done correctly. But I've had some bad tasting meads even done correctly. They just turned out of exactly what was put into them. I did one with a spinach and lemon, and I thought it would turn out pretty good, and it was terrible. But it did exactly what the recipe called for it to do. The alcohol was extremely high. It had a lot of vitamins and minerals in it, so it did turn out, but it was just an awful tasting mead. That's one reason why we're doing everything on a small scale of a gallon batch, even half gallon, so that way if something turns out exquisite, we can impress upon it and move forward. But I think some of these books are some good reference material for you to start coming into. Remember to look for the book, How to Make Mead Like a Viking, and look on Kindle for the Big Book of Meads. And I think that if you get a couple of these books, like I said, I really enjoy the Wildcraft Cocktails. They get you thinking outside the box. The Sacred Herbal Healing of Beers. I think that gets you thinking outside the box. And learn how to do some of your own yeast culturing. How to save some of the yeast that you use. How to back filter them and stuff like that. I think some of those are pretty good prime examples if you really want to get into this as a full-fledged hobby. Thank you, and I'm Michael.